Frank Fritz's body was discovered on the floor of his bathroom, but what lurked in his garage caught everyone off guard. The hidden treasure is worth millions. A collection of 75 classic motorcycles, with an estimated value of $250,000, including a prototype 1947 Indian Chief. George Lucas believed the Yoda prototype from Star Wars had been destroyed, but Aerosmiths ended up losing it. His valuables weren't the most shocking thing, though. His private notebooks revealed the grisly details of his last days, the real reason for his dismissal from American pickers, and the identity of the man attempting to siphon off his $6 million wealth. In 1963, Frank Fritz came into this world in Davenport, Iowa. Even as a little boy, he stood out from the crowd. Frank, in contrast to his peers, spent much of his time collecting rocks, coins, stamps, and even empty beer cans while he rode his bike or traded baseball cards. He had an eye for detail that other children lacked. The practice was considered harmless by his parents, Bill and Susan. However, Frank recognized value in these discarded artifacts. An item that should be preserved. The staples from his school papers were something he used to hoard, he claimed. It went that deep. Even unusual things, like his interest in razor blades, were signs early on that he could see details that others missed. Frank attended Sudlow Intermediate and Bettendorf High School as he matured. Mike Wolfe was someone he met there. They hit it off in 8th school, and soon after that, they began spending their weekends at garage sales and flea markets, searching for unique finds. Similar interests in strange, forgotten, and dusty artifacts with stories to tell drew the two youngsters together. Frank went his own way, even though several of his teachers had high hopes for his potential with a more conventional education. College didn't seem like it would teach him the things that really important to him. He had the view that the best way to learn was by doing, by getting one's hands on antiques, researching their background, and discovering their unique qualities. When Frank graduated from high school, he began working as a fire inspector for a huge portion of Iowa. Even though he remained in that field for nearly 25 years, collecting was always a part of him. It expanded, if anything. His interest in motorbikes began when he was a teenager. He spent more than $4,000, a substantial sum for 1964, on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle when he was 16 years old. Frank failed to perceive it as a mere bicycle, much to his parents' dismay. It belonged to the past. He put in long hours at jobs like Coast to Coast Hardware and Quad City Automatic Sprinkler so he could indulge in his newfound hobby. Over time, he accumulated a collection of over 100 vintage motorcycles. In fact, he constructed a barn to house them all. He was well known among motorcyclists even before he made an appearance on television because of his annual pilgrimage to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota. It wasn't merely Frank's collection that set him apart. It was his method of collection. A picker's eye was what he referred to it as. In an abandoned barn or attic, he could perceive details that others had overlooked. He devoted a great deal of time to investigating rundown structures, making mental notes of potential treasure troves, and speculating about the histories of the people who had lived there in the past. What he really sought out, though, were the tales behind the things he gathered. This mindset transformed him from an indifferent collector into someone who revered each artifact as if it were a priceless artifact plucked from the depths of the rubbish. Despite working as a fire inspector, Frank's love for collecting never waned. In the course of his investigations into historic structures, he frequently discovered artifacts that had been abandoned. Fire helmets, alarms, vintage gear. These were more than just discarded implements. Frank had an uncanny knack for spotting these artifacts from long ago. Something more evolved from his inspections. Clambering around safety records and fire codes were these secret treasure hunts. His odd dual career path as an inspector by day and a picker by heart molded him into the specialist he is today. He honed his keen eye for detail in his job as an inspector. He mastered the art of building reading and could see details that others missed. He would subsequently use the same talent to his advantage when searching storage sheds and antique shops for priceless artifacts. He wasn't speculating. He was methodical. He was able to notice dangers that others ignored because he had spent years examining walls. That advantage would come in handy on American pickers later on when he was digging through piles of trash to find something worth keeping. A single, insignificant event altered the course of events. Frank made $475 from the sale of an old, unremarkable item that he had purchased for $15. The sale stayed with him. The profit was great, but it wasn't the only thing. That his knowledge was valuable was the realization. His years of research into these artifacts were now bearing fruit. It was only after that one deal that he realized his dream may become a reality. He began to see collecting then not merely as a pastime but as a means to an end, the creation of something greater. I made the decision to jump in 2002. After decades of fire inspection, he decided to retire and start a business in Savannah, Illinois, named Frank's Finds. A store it was not. There was firefighting equipment, old tools, and other artifacts that most people had long since forgotten about. It was like a miniature museum. There was a past to the structure. Entering the pub, which was housed in a historic opera theater, was like stepping back in time. Some tourists complained about the musty smell and gloomy appearance, but Frank thought it added to the allure. Unfiltered, authentic, and brimming with personality, this was his reality. The store attracted collectors and inquisitive tourists over the years. People would visit solely to marvel at the unusual and fascinating objects showcased. The setting wasn't everyone's cup of tea. It was difficult for some to use, but for those who got Frank, it was invaluable. The store and all of its contents served as the basis for his subsequent narrative. Frank was prepared for the arrival of television. He could have remained silent. He needed to be authentic. The one who saw value where others saw valueless, and who maintained an unwavering faith that everything had a tale to tell. Mike Wolfe was already on the prowl for vintage treasures with a camera before American Pickers became a television phenomenon. Around 2002, he began filming his escapades. Simultaneously, his long-lost companion Frank Fritz had recently quit his secure position as a fire inspector and established his very own antique shop in Savannah, Illinois. Frank took great pleasure in operating his shop, which housed a collection of antique toys, oil cans, and motorbikes. Although he had no intention of leaving, Mike had a plan. He spent months attempting to get Frank to accompany him on his picking trips because he thought it could lead to something more substantial. Frank doubted himself. The shop was satisfactory to him. In a constant wave. He was the one who owned it. However, that all changed on a single day. A fraternal organization sold Frank a little badge for $115. It was unremarkable at first glance. He made $1,450 from the sale later on. A rush, or gambler's high as he put it, washed over him in that split second. Because of that sensation and Mike's persistent prodding, Frank decided to give it a go. He locked his doors, gathered his belongings, and set off on foot with Mike. The initial trips, recorded spontaneously, would later serve as the foundational content that captivated television executives. Everything changed when American Pickers began in January 2010. Before becoming someone that millions of people watched weekly, Frank was just a shy business owner. More than 3 million people tuned in to watch the pilot, making it one of the most successful premieres ever for History Channel. Frank, who contrasted Mike's exuberant nature with his beard, stocky frame, and measured speech, was a striking contrast. It made him popular. As soon as word got out, people were lined up to see them live. They went to the California Surf Museum that October, and there was a massive line out the door. Looking perplexed, Frank finally spoke up. "What on earth are all these people doing here?" But after that, he remained until everyone had an autograph to sign. One episode reached 5.3 million views just 8 months after the show premiered. Frank was now famous. They used to go on wild, impromptu expeditions. With no predetermined route, they began their adventure in a white Mercedes van and eventually switched to a Ford Transit. They were traveling across southern Maine in September 2011 when they came to Champion Auto in Arundel. I was astounded, as was the owner, Mario Bonnet. The stars were suddenly appearing in his yard, just as he had imagined them every week as he watched the broadcast. Mike focused on motorcycle apparel, while Frank purchased oil cans, signage, and gas station relics. For 5 days, they did nothing except explore the region, meeting new individuals and following up on leads. 2 companions on a quest for the past in a van, that was the enchantment. Frank and Mike's polar opposites, in the greatest possible sense, were a big part of the show's success. Tall and slender, Mike exuded boundless energy and enthusiasm. Simplicity and calmness characterized Frank's demeanor. Old motorcycles and Volkswagens were Mike's choice. Toys, tin cans, and motorbike memorabilia were among Frank's hunting targets. It became crystal clear when they combed through Mario's main residence. From the motorbike gear, Mike snatched it. Frank snatched the signs for the gas stations. Like a jigsaw puzzle, they fit together. A dreamer, sensitive, humorous, and insightful person, that was Mike's description of Frank once. Viewers were captivated by the unconventional chemistry between the duo. Many identified with Frank's meticulous approach. Some others found Mike's rapid speech more relatable. You could relate to the show because of that combination. Frank's passion with motorbikes predates the show. His parents were likely worried when he purchased a 1964 Harley-Davidson while still a teenager. That was just the beginning. A barn that seemed more like a museum housed his collection of 35 antique bicycles that he had amassed over the years. A 1938 four-cylinder model that he discovered in a Philadelphia barn was one of his rare Indian motorcycles. Additional motorcycles were made in Britain. Anthony, BMW, Triumph. A 1942 Harley frame fitted with a Volkswagen engine and hand-painted by Von Dutch himself, the Von Dutch XAVW was among his most cherished possessions. Its discovery at a yard sale shocked Frank, who had seen it in a magazine many years before. Just like every other bike in his collection, that one had a tale to tell. And it was Frank's main concern. Back in 2013, he made the decision to spill the beans. His book, How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles, was published. It was accessible to everyone. If you loved bikes or were thinking about starting a collection, he wrote it for you. He included anecdotes, photographs, and advice from his personal discoveries in the book. What to look for in a hidden treasure, how to negotiate, and how to detect a good offer were all things he covered. Like on TV, his delivery was straightforward, humorous, and uncomplicated. Frank saw the book as a means of passing on his knowledge and wisdom accumulated over the years. His goal was for others to learn about the device's background and experience the joy he had when he revived one. One of Frank's hobbies, collecting firehouse artifacts, is influenced by his previous career as a fire inspector. His 25 years of building inspection experience gave him access to areas that most collectors never get to view. If one knew where to search, they may find old, deserted firehouses, stations, and equipment. You could feel his excitement on American pickers whenever they found something linked to fire, brass extinguishers, leather helmets, vintage alarm systems in his collection. He considered it more than a mere category. On a personal level, Frank was unique in his approach to collecting. Things weren't only visible to him. He witnessed tales. Every item evoked a specific moment, location, or individual. Rather than wasting time negotiating a price, he would often spend time learning about the item's background from the vendor. Objects depicting traditional American life were of particular interest to him. Antiquated equipment, long-lost goods, peculiar playthings. He was extremely careful with artifacts associated with the conflict, and he occasionally gave them to museums if they had any connection to the dead. Who was that? Frank. He thought these tales should be passed down through generations, not buried. For the better part of his life, Frank Fritz fought an invisible enemy. His 36-year battle with Crohn's illness was a constant source of agony and fatigue, which he felt on set of American Pickers and throughout his life. A close friend of Frank's claimed that he had been coping with it since he was in his 20s or 30s. As millions of people watched him on television, he managed to conceal his anguish effectively. Always in the dark about his struggles. He found success after he stopped drinking and committed to sobriety. Unfortunately, the toll of years of disease and stress had already been felt. His condition continued to deteriorate. Plus, his body couldn't take it any longer. Until his untimely death at the age of 60, few knew the extent to which he had been quietly suffering. Things began to emerge into the spotlight in 2017. The cops pulled Frank over because he was driving on the incorrect side of the road. Xanax, he claimed, had been prescribed to him for his anxiousness, and he had been drinking, he told them. Operating while intoxicated was the charge against him after he failed the sobriety test. He went on to say that the constant sense of being watched and scrutinized was the root cause of his uneasiness. He felt the weight of expectation and the scrutiny of those who followed him everywhere he went. Even though he escaped jail time through a plea deal, his reputation had already taken a hit. That event revealed more than just how celebrity was draining him. Somehow, it was altering his character. He also started to drift apart from his co-star Mike Wolfe. Frank claimed they hadn't communicated for 2 years by 2021. The absence of employment wasn't the main thing that bothered him. The stillness was the key. Mike failed to contact him after his back surgery. It seemed to Frank that the show had always been one-sided, with Mike as the main attraction and him as an extra. A bandmate of Steven Tyler's, he said, it was like that. No one ever said you had to play the hero. Frank wasn't buying it when Mike said he missed Frank in an online post. Someone else undoubtedly authored it, he asserted, calling it false. In reality, he couldn't believe Mike had ever complimented him. Nonetheless, on Memorial Day weekend in May of 2023, after years of animosity, they reconnected. Making that happen was helped by a common buddy. Unfortunately, the agony continued. Frank strained his back while he was at home during the pandemic. The timing of his surgery, though necessary, was absolutely disastrous. Isolation, lockdowns, and a breakup all happened at once. He became dependent on painkillers at that point. It all began with pain treatment, but quickly spiraled out of hand. Mike Wolfe likened it to witnessing a person's destruction at the hands of a hurricane. They made an effort to assist, organized an intervention, and pleaded with him to stop using. Frank denied any problems, but the truth was that he was. In order to get him back on the show, they demanded a negative drug test. Clearly, he failed it. His tenure on American Pickers came to an end with that. It was March 2020 when Frank's final program aired. It appeared at first that all he needed was some downtime to get well. In retrospect, he even claimed he had never departed. Not long after he underwent back surgery, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. However, Mike had already stated in July 2021 that he would not be returning. Just wishing Frank the best was all he said in his post. Subtle changes were taking place. 2 rods were implanted into Frank's spine, and he had 185 sutures. He claimed to be completely healed and eager to get back to work. But the network has different intentions. Those closest to him said that the decision to not bring him back broke his heart. Forgotten and ignored, he felt ignored. After that, his health continued to deteriorate. July 14, 2022 was a watershed moment in Frank Fritz's life. A buddy of Frank's came into his Iowa farmhouse that morning and saw him sprawled out on the floor. He remained still. "I am speechless," he said. An immediate 911 call was made by the friend. A buddy of his warned that he might be having a seizure. "We are unable to communicate." Frank had a big stroke when he was 59 years old. The brain injury was already severe when doctors took him to the hospital in a flash. He became severely impaired in movement and cognition. He spent 1 month in the hospital before being transferred to a nursing home. That was just the start of a protracted and agonizing struggle for existence. Frank continued to require round-the-clock care even after his return home. His condition continued to deteriorate. Among the several 911 calls was the one he received after he returned to the hospital after contracting pneumonia. It became more apparent throughout the weeks that Frank was unable to make decisions on his life or finances. As of August 2022, the court had intervened. Chris Davis, his friend, was appointed to make his personal decisions on his behalf. His estate was placed under the supervision of a bank. It was over $6 million in value. The situation was made extremely plain in the court papers. No one could help Frank if he was sick. He was unable to guarantee himself access to basic necessities including food, housing, and healthcare. Severe harm or death might have befallen him if no one came to his aid. However, assistance was still necessary. The court put pressure on both the bank and the guardian. To ensure that Frank was receiving genuine care, the judges examined their acts annually. The price tag came next. While Frank was a millionaire on American Pickers, his savings went down the drain rather fast. His monthly medical expenses were close to $30,000. The yearly total was above $350,000. At that moment, his annual investment income was roughly $60,000. That was completely inadequate. Physical therapy, constant supervision by nurses, and medication for Crohn's disease and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease were all necessary for Frank's well-being. Jerry Jandro, a close friend of Frank's, reported that after his death, there were discussions about selling off his antiques. Jerry expressed his belief that he would perform admirably in an auction. His devoted followers would back it. Unfortunately, Frank's health deteriorated over time. Jerry expressed that it was devastating to visit him. Half of Frank's body was completely paralyzed. When he tried to raise his arm, Jerry recalled, it would simply fall. The reality that Frank was fully aware of what was happening to him only made it worse. He knew he had fallen a long way. His speech had become unrecognizable. He was paralyzed. And nothing could be altered by him. Jerry thought Frank no longer wanted to fight. He claimed that many people's will to life is sapped when they're exhausted. I truly believe that he could have extended his life expectancy had he not given up. After that, the last call arrived. Mike Wolfe, Frank's longtime American Pickers co-star, was informed of Frank's rapid decline on September 30, 2024. He was quickly joined by Mike. He remained there, hand in hand with Frank, for half an hour, murmuring softly as she stroked his chest. Apparently, Mike informed him that he wasn't angry with him. "I love you," I told him. Mike conveyed one final message to Frank before he slipped away. "Locate your mother. Locate her immediately." Frank died at 8:50 p.m. Michael was present. Annette Oberlander, Frank's mom, and her best friend were also there. Mike was always there for Frank, according to Annette, who spoke about it subsequently. Ultimately, she said, he was by his side. They were both satisfied with that. The contents of Frank Fritz's former garage were a complete surprise to everyone when he died in September 2024. Something extraordinary had been kept secret for a long time. Over 75 unique classic motorcycles, all with their own unique histories. They are all historical artifacts. Some of them appeared as though they were freshly manufactured. Some were obviously waiting for a second opportunity, while others were dusty and corroded. It wasn't until 1912 that the first bike was manufactured. Some were so rare that specialists thought they had disappeared forever. It was completely unknown that Frank had been secretly amassing all of this. Little did his intimate circle of friends know just how much he had hidden away. However, museums and collectors all over the globe went into overdrive as word got out. Lots of people thought it may be a major find for motorbikes in a long time. The more people looked, the more shocking the details were. In a memorable episode of American Pickers, a 1922 ACE-4 bike was purchased for a mere $45,000. Almost $200,000 was its current value. Beyond that, there was a 1939 Indian 4, dubbed the Aristocrat, that was valued at more than $115,000 and stood out. Even a 1928 model with the original paint still on it was among the pre-war Indian Scouts that were found. Also, Frank possessed 3 vintage Harley-Davidson panheads from the 1950s, all of which were undergoing various forms of restoration. However, the most shocking thing was an exclusive 1947 model of an Indian chief. The experts predicted that it may be worth more than $250,000 due to its unique design, which did not resemble any other model. The collection was exceptional for more than just the bikes, though. Beside them were journals that had been written by hand. Several of them, preserved with great care for over 3 decades. Frank had meticulously documented every detail. Who had previously owned each motorcycle, where they originated, and what parts he needed to locate. Even the delight he had when something eventually ran again, the time he spent in the workshop, and the hardships of bringing some bikes back to life were all documented in his writings. Every now and then he'd include brief remarks about the ride's emotional impact or a memory it evoked. The collection became more than just a collection of devices thanks to their journals. Narrative was conveyed. Plus, it increased the value for collectors. When the experts finished counting everything, they thought the collection might be worth more than $2 million. When the auction began, some speculated that, with Frank's name tied to everything, the price may go above $3 million. There was a mad dash for the auction house's rights to manage the sale. Folks understood this wasn't merely a vintage bike sale. What mattered most was that you could call it your own, a cherished relic of American history held in the hands of a man who saw its worth. It wasn't just motorbikes, though, that Frank loved from the past. A dilapidated van that didn't appear to be much was hidden away in the estate. However, this van was unlike any other. When Aerosmith were still relatively unknown, they used the same one when traveling from gig to show. In 2018, Frank and Mike Wolf discovered it in the Massachusetts woods, paid $25,000 to acquire it, and then restored it. In 2019, the band was taken aback when they saw it again. According to Joe Perry, it was just incredible. An emotional Ray Tabano, a founding member, recalled the days when they would all chip in after paying for gas and tolls. Their aspirations and tools were both transported in that vehicle. Next came the objects with an air of mystery. A taxidermy collector had once sold Frank a huge elephant's head for $9,500. Jack White of the White Stripes eventually became the proud owner of the head, having acquired it through a swap of antiquities and cash. In part due to the success of his album, Elephant. The purchase caused a commotion among animal rights activists, but also demonstrated Frank's curiosity and desire to acquire unusual items. An authentic Jello wagon, dating back to the early 1900s and used to promote the dessert in rural areas, was also in his possession. Also, a museum now houses that particular piece. Frank had a keen sense of what was important in life, whether it was music, cuisine, or strange Americana. He even dabbled in collecting items from science fiction. For Star Wars, Yoda prototypes were discovered by him and Mike during an episode of American Pickers. Using early designs from 1978 and molds inspired by Albert Einstein, they were verified to be authentic by a former Lucasfilm artist, who initially thought they were fan art. They cost Frank a pretty penny. And the final value of each was more than $6,000. It proved that his passion for collecting extended beyond only motorcycles and signs. He was aware of the influence of popular culture, but a legal storm rolled in at the same time as Frank's legacy was being celebrated. His dad, William Bill Fritz, went to court in February of 2025. He claimed the will that was filed in 2023 was a forgery. Bill claims that Frank was never the one to sign it. The will distributed nearly all of Frank's $6 million estate to his loved ones who helped him during his illness. Bill was left out. He insisted he was deserving of everything because he was the only one who had survived from Frank's original family. A jury trial was requested in the court filing in order to resolve the matter. More complications arose in the case as time went on. Frank was placed under conservatorship shortly after suffering a severe stroke in 2022. Frank was declared legally incapable of making his own judgments by a judge who presided over the case. The argument that Bill put out revolved around that ruling. How could Frank legitimately sign a will if he was unable to care for himself? To top it all off, Bill claimed he had been isolated from his son in his latter years. He asserted that they had been close when fishing in St. Thomas and that he had been unjustly ignored. The question of reality now rests with the courts. We are all eager to find out how this chapter of Frank Fritz's narrative ends as more and more proof is presented. However, one aspect has been established. Far more than just vintage cars and motorbikes were among Frank's possessions. His enduring impact is rooted in his fervor, recollection, and profound affection for bygone eras. He could find stories worth preserving in every vehicle, be it a rusted engine or a beat-up van. And at long last, everyone is starting to notice them as well.